the wonderful world of psychiatry. And I just want to stress, you know, Jeff is a psychologist. Jeff was a professor, an editor, an author, and all sorts. But this is specifically psychiatry and their diagnostic manual, the DSM, which is a terrifying thing. Right, I'll start playing this. Hopefully Jeff will come in while it's playing. But do try and listen, because it will give you an understanding of Jeffrey's position on psychiatry.
As Thomas Szasz wrote years ago.
Can you just give me a sound check on that? Could you hear that? Hello, the boy Craig. Good to see you. Hello, Ludwig. Hello, Raymond. Pags is on. Clark, Vertec. Weaponizing punctuality. That's good of him to come through, though. Thank you, people. I'll continue playing it.
As Thomas Szasz wrote years ago, the only true political virtue is obedience to authority, and the only true political sin is independence. Independence renders authority useless, and that is what infuriates it so. You've undoubtedly been told you're mentally ill for daring to say that the emperor called psychiatry has no clothes, not to mention stupid and unscientific. At least this is what some of my colleagues say about me at one university. So if this is something that has happened to you, I'm here to say that you're not alone. The controversy regarding the myth of mental illness and psychiatry is not about science or medicine, it's about power. When psychiatrists start agreeing with you, well, then perhaps you ought to reconsider your position. Something may be wrong. So I'd like to say a few disobedient things, which is especially true because I was trained as a psychologist, and when a member of the profession criticizes its own, it's considered especially sacrilegious. What do we know that is true, that the cult of psychiatry keeps telling us is false? First, the idea that there is a known brain lesion causing mental illness. The truth is, we cannot tell who is mentally ill and who is not by looking at pictures of their brains or analyzing their blood. Psychiatrists had to invent their own book of diseases because pathologists would have nothing to do with them. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, a great work of fiction. What's the difference? What's the difference between the DSM and a scientific book of disease? Every disorder in the DSM is invented. Every disease listed in a pathology textbook is discovered. Real disease is found in a cadaver at autopsy. Mental illness is not. Mental illness refers to something that a person does. Real disease refers to something that a person has. Consider this yet another way. It takes one person to have a real disease. It takes two people to have a mental illness. If you're alone on an island, you could develop a real disease like cancer or heart disease, but you cannot develop a mental illness such as hyperactivity or schizophrenia. This is because mental illness is always diagnosed on the basis of some sort of social conflict. When people do something that others find objectionable, they can be diagnosed as mentally ill. If the person doing the diagnosing is more powerful than the person diagnosed, then there is trouble. In this sense, the diagnosis of mental illness is always a weapon. Not so when it comes to diagnosing real disease. Think of how, when people get angry with one another, they inevitably resort to some kind of diagnosis. They say, "You're crazy. You're mentally ill. You're paranoid." Can you imagine somebody getting angry with someone and saying, "You have diabetes. You have Parkinson's disease"? Social conflict has nothing to do with developing a real disease. You don't develop diabetes because someone doesn't like the way you think, speak, or behave. You have to have someone else present to judge that your behavior is morally good or bad in order to have a mental illness. So diagnosis is a weapon, a tool people use against one another, especially when there is some kind of power conflict present. And what of treatment? Treatment for mental illness is punishment. Look at our criminal justice system. When someone commits a crime and a psychiatrist is in the courtroom, a defendant may go to a mental institution instead of a prison. Can you imagine a judge saying, "I sentence you to treatment for your cancer"? I submit to you that psychiatric treatment is worse than prison. For in prison, they don't judge how long people should be deprived of liberty on the basis of what they think about themselves and the world. In a mental institution, of course, this is the case. If you don't think about yourself and the world correctly, you'll be punished longer. Psychiatrists love to say that mental illness is a real disease, just like cancer. The analogy between mental illness and real disease is not reciprocal. It doesn't hold both ways. Having cancer is not like being depressed. We don't shock people who have cancer to make them better, especially if they don't want to be shocked. Consider how melanoma, a deadly form of skin cancer, is a disease here as well as in northern India. If you have melanoma, does it cease to exist if you move to another country, another culture? Of course not. If you're wandering the foothills of the Himalayas and meditating for 15 hours a day, you may very well be called a holy man in India. Take that same person, have him walk across the grounds of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and he's diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and committed to a mental hospital. What do you think psychiatrists would do if Jesus were alive today, or Buddha, or Mohammed? Bada bing, right into a mental hospital, injected with drugs to stop their crazy beliefs and speech.
Okay, people, so there was, you got a lot of Jeffrey's, his, like a nice broad stroke of Jeff's, his thoughts on psychiatry, the world of, he's here, by the way, he's saved the day. So without further ado, I'm still shaking a little bit. He is a hero of mine, and to manage to get him in 24 hours early is ridiculous. So without further ado.
Hi, Chris.
Hello, Jeff. I'm so sorry.
No problem at all. I'm just glad I happened to glance and see that you guys were on. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. I didn't have time to put on my makeup, but you have to accept me the way I am.
Well, I was running around like a lunatic. You sent me a photo because that other one's, 10, 15 years old, maybe? And
right.
And I sent you an email back saying, Jeff, I haven't really got time to change that now. And you're probably thinking, hang on, you've got like a whole day. Anyway.
Right. I always get screwed up with the time.
What done it was, I was just setting it up, putting it on Twitter and, telling a few people, and I got a message on my phone, a notification, reminder, Jeffrey Schaler, tomorrow. And I was like, no. Oh, and then people in the chat started saying, I thought you said this was Wednesday.
I just got a call from a friend of mine in Colorado, and he said, something screwed up. No problem.
So thank you very much for adapting. I hope I haven't caused you too much inconvenience.
No, I'm always happy to see you and talk to people about this, my favorite topic.
Well, I just did briefly mention that because you came on here, I think probably about 2 years ago.
Yes.
And we talked about your book, Addiction is a Choice, because that's kind of my area.
Mm-hmm.
But since then, you something happened to you quite bad, didn't it?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with cancer about 2 years ago. And so I was receiving chemotherapy and kind of under the weather, but I was declared in remission on July 7th, 2021, my 70th birthday. And I've been doing pretty well. But actually, that's a good entree here because, what does it mean to have cancer or to have a real disease?
Right.
I had a routine blood test as part of a physical, and they said, your white blood cells are very low. And I said, okay, let's do it again. So they did it like 4 or 5 times in order to establish reliability, as they call it. Yeah. And they said, it looks like something is wrong. I said, okay. And so they sent me to an oncologist, not a psychiatrist. And the oncologist ran the tests again, and he said, we need to do what's called a bone marrow, where they extract from the inside of the bone, which is not a very pleasant procedure. But I did that, and the doctor, that was at about 1:00 one afternoon. And then he said, I'll call you in 10 days with the results. I'm just saying all this to compare it with psychiatry, which claims that it's the treatment of real disease. And I said, okay. And he said, I'll call you in about 10 days, 2 weeks. And then about an hour later, he called and he said, you need to go to the hospital right away. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, you need to go to Hopkins, which is near me, and you need to check in. Everything's set up. Your blood work is dangerous, and you could die very soon from a blood clot because of this particular type of leukemia.
That's right.
Okay. Now, one thing is that I never felt any what we call symptoms. Symptoms would be subjective complaints. I never felt weird. And but what they discovered are what are called signs. And signs are objective markers of disease. So, what people who are big psychiatry advocates are always trying to establish is, well, we have real signs of cancer. No, we have real signs of schizophrenia. In fact, they don't. But they're searching for signs because that would establish some credibility on their part. And there simply are not any signs of schizophrenia or depression. And, that's just the fact. So with me, there were signs, as there with most diagnosis of real disease. They said, you really need to go to the hospital tonight. It's your choice. Another big difference between psychiatry and real medicine. If you don't want to go, that's your choice. But we suggest that you go because you might drop dead. And so I went there and got there at about 10 that evening. And by 1 a.m, they were pumping me with chemotherapy. Okay. And to make a long story short, 9 months later of daily infusions of chemotherapy, I was declared in remission. And what's interesting, again, let's compare this with psychiatric disease. They now, I'm amazed by medicine, they now can detect whether there are any remnants genetically of the gene that caused my cancer. And they said there aren't anymore. And so it looks like you're in remission. They never want to say you're completely cured because, it could come back. But the only thing I've been struggling with since then is the effects of chemotherapy, which are pretty significant. Anyway, I'm sure many of your audience can relate. But you see, in psychiatry, there's no sign. In other words, we keep hearing about, we have an MRI that shows the brain's different, or the PET scan shows that the brain is different. the bottom line is we cannot tell who is labeled mentally ill and who is not based on a picture of the brain. There are people that we consider normal who have brain differences. There are people that we consider mentally ill that don't have these differences. Do you understand?
Sure.
So I like to look at this from the point of view of true science. And I do consider myself a qualified person in the sense that I can evaluate the scientific credibility of claims. Most psychiatrists and psychologists really are pretty stupid when it comes to science, especially psychologists, of which I'm unfortunately a member. But I was trained in developmental psychology. We never used the word disease. We just said people at X stage seem to be able to understand language. They can understand these tasks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we never say they're sick. And we never violate their liberty and their freedom. That's another characteristic which I want to get into with you and your audience if they're interested, and that is
Of course,
psychiatry. Psychiatry is used to deprive people of freedom and of responsibility. And if we look at the freedom issue, they're deprived of liberty, and in the US, which is similar to other countries, they're deprived of what we call due process of law. If you're accused of something, you have to go through certain procedures. And this happens a lot in involuntary commitment, right? In other words, if I suspect that you are mentally ill, actually worse than that, if I want to get rid of you, I claim that you could harm yourself or others. Okay, those are the magic words when it comes to depriving people of liberty via psychiatry. And now psychologists and social workers have jumped on that bandwagon because they think it's cool to associate with psychiatrists. But bottom line is, and this is a fact, we cannot tell who is going to harm self or others with an accuracy beyond that expected by chance. Those are the magic words. And this is relevant to these horrible shootings that are going on in the US. People keep saying, oh, well, they're mentally ill. We should be able to detect them early on. But you can't detect them. And what do these people always say? Oh, he was a loner. He was kind of silent and a nice guy.
Computer games.
Yeah, exactly. So we can go down that path. And then the other one has to do with depriving people of responsibility. You weren't really responsible for what you did because you're mentally ill.
Well,
Now, go ahead.
I had that one with addiction. I've been to a lot of rehabs, and someone would tell an awful story of something they'd done. And I mean awful. The one I always, my viewers have heard it many times. He sucker punched his grandmother to steal her wedding ring. And the therapist said to him, "You're not a bad person. That's your disease." And he said, "Yeah, but I've got so much guilt." And I said in that group therapy, I said, "No, you should have guilt. And you're an arsehole. Now, that doesn't mean you're always an arsehole, but you certainly were then." And I'm not sure that's good treatment. A therapist saying, and that's the responsibility, that's the agency. Oh, it wasn't you. Your addiction, the disease of addiction took over you. And that's why I went through about 6 or 7 rehabs before I got your book. And it was such a, I told you last time, it was like, oh, thank God. Well, ironically, God in rehabs. But, the disease model gets all those people out of some very bad behaviors. It wasn't you. You didn't make that decision. And they did. I did. People do.
Well, one thing I emphasize everywhere I speak is when you're focused now on responsibility, you weren't responsible for your behavior. What we will always see is a deprivation of liberty when people talk about no responsibility, because what the state particularly, and that's the strongest force around, consistently says is that if you are not responsible, then we have to take responsibility for you. And they do that in the form of depriving you of liberty. I hope people are following me on this, because this is a core issue here. If you're like, let's look at the repeal of drug prohibition, something I've been very focused on since back in the 80s. And they always said I was crazy and all this. I was the chairman of a drug abuse council for a county here. And I came out and I said, we really need to take a stand in terms of drug prohibition. It's causing more harm than good. And my position has always been, let people take whatever they want to get high or for whatever reason. The only thing we need to do is hold them responsible for their actions.
There you
right?
go.
If you kill somebody, you're not going to get off on saying, well, I smoked a little too much PCP or whatever it is. My position is do what you want in terms of what you put in your body. But if you harm somebody else, then we have a different issue going on. And that's deeply related to psychiatry, involuntary commitment, the insanity defense. Involuntary commitment and the insanity defense are two sides of the same coin, Chris. You know this. We can't have one without the other.
And you were considered the outlier with that opinion, right. I imagine, in the 80s.
Right. And of course, there are many people that agree with me, but they don't want to go public because you get punished. It's like saying there's no God. When people ask me, well, what's your religion? And I said, well, I'm a devout atheist.
Dedicated to it.
And they take one step back, I mean, they probably closer to Buddhism than anything else.
But funny enough, me too.
Right. But this is really taboo to say there's no such thing as mental illness. There's no such thing as God, all these different things. My position generally is, if you want to believe that, fine. I don't care. But don't force it on somebody else. That's the
and also don't appeal to it to, again, hand over responsibility somewhere down the line, right. Because that often is said by people, God told me to do it. Has been many a defense, hasn't it? Not a very good one, but ironically it has come up. Jeff, do you know a lot about the origins of the DSM? Because one of my viewers sent me this remarkable video earlier. Liam, if you're here, remind me of the bloke's name. He was telling me that this I can't remember the bloke's name. You probably know him.
Yes, I do.
He was talking about there was like nine of them in a room, just coming up with the diseases and voting on them. And there was a girl there who was like an intern making tea, and they needed her for one of the votes because it was equal numbers. So they just said, "Do you believe in ADHD?" And she was like, "I suppose so." And then the DSM-5, the fifth one, I imagine, I assume that means, it was a bestseller on Amazon.
Yeah.
And it turns out Pfizer was buying these in bulk and distributing them, all, like you said earlier, that psychologists, sociologists, social sciences, and just give them out. No, have them, because alongside the popularity of the DSM, you've got in the last, I think this bloke said, in the last 20 years, well, it was a figure I can remember. In 2016, 20% of the British population were on some kind of anti-anxiety or antidepressant chemical, prescribed. And, that has just gone, it's just gone through, to the moon since, the late 70s, early 80s.
Right.
And in parallel with the DSM, as far as this bloke was saying.
Well, you've got it right. I debated the chairman of the DSM. And forgive me if I've got his name reversed, Alan Francis or Francis Allen. I can't remember.
Alan Francis, yeah, the bloke said it today, yeah.
And he was, he's a very nice guy. And if people want to look at our debate, it was conducted under the auspices of the Cato Foundation. And 2 or 3 of us debated him and a professor of law. And one of the things I started with is his quote. He said, "The DSM is bullshit." Now this is the editor in chief for many years, right? He's a very nice guy, and basically he agreed with me and my friend Thomas Zoss. He said these are not diseases. Now keep in
And
mind that disease is a magic word here. In other words, once you declare it
he's
disease, go ahead.
changed his mind.
What?
He's changed his mind, or he's just not happy with the development of
Oh
psychiatry.
no, he's a brilliant scientist and psychiatrist. He was at Duke University, and he was in charge of the whole DSM. But he got very upset because people used this as some kind of credibility to establish it as a disease. It's a little bit like, what's the Dostoevsky story about how Jesus comes back? I can't remember the name of it, but basically Jesus comes back and nobody believes that he's Jesus, so they crucify him, or it's the Grand Inquisitor. I'm sorry. Fantastic story. If people who assert that these things are real diseases say, well, the DSM says that it's a disease and blah blah blah, and then I'd like to introduce him to my friend Alan Francis. No, you don't have that quite right. I didn't say they were diseases. That's different. What I said was that some people exhibit disturbing, not disturbed behavior, and we tend to categorize these behaviors according to different categories, like mood disorder or anxiety disorder or thought disorder or what's the other moods? Thought disorder. Well, and there's one other one, but that doesn't mean that they're diseases. And the thing is that once people say they're diseases, then we get into depriving them of liberty and responsibility. They make this giant leap. And I just got such a kick out of Alan Francis saying this, to people who say it's Alan Francis says it. And he goes, no, I don't. If anybody wants to look at this, I think the transcript is online at Cato Unbound. Just put in mental health and the law, Cato Unbound, and you'll see this, how we debated this over and over again. So
Incredible.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, what's the point of the DSM? There are really 2 points. If I am talking to you and you're another, quote, mental health professional, and I say, Chris, I'd like to send you somebody who wants some kind of help, and you say, well, can you tell me anything about him? And I might say, well, he exhibits some of the symptoms of what people call schizophrenia. He's not thinking correctly or accurately. And so it helps us to communicate. But oftentimes, people who are receiving a referral want you to draw your own conclusions. The second thing is, it's money-based. In other words, you cannot get reimbursed by an insurance company unless you give them a DSM code, right? Now, I've always been committed to helping people who want help. And I never got involved in diagnosing them with DSM codes and all that other nonsense. I've always helped people if they can afford to pay for my time. But people on the other side who are, I'm not paranoid, but these people are out to get me.
No, I'm not surprised in the slightest. It's a big money.
Oh,
yeah.
You've always got to follow the money trail. I think most people realize that. But anyway, the DSM, as I mentioned in that clip where I gave a speech, is a great work of fiction. And it's, every year they add another category. If you're picking your nose too much, then that's a disease. I once had a former Israeli soldier came to see me for therapy, and years ago, and I said, well, why are you here? What's the problem? And he says, I masturbate too much, right? Okay. I don't really know what too much is.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
Right. I mean, some people will say it's twice a day. Others will say it's 200 times a day. I said, well, why is that a problem for you? And he goes, And actually, he was operating Israeli tanks, and he was very nervous because he was afraid because the enemy had these new weapons that could pierce through the armor, and he thought he was going to get fried. But he said, I just have to masturbate when I feel anxious, you know? And I said, well, when is that a problem? And he said, when it interferes with my life, my work. Well, we don't have to call that a disease. Thomas Szasz would call that a problem in living. You know, there's some people that just want to masturbate all the time, 10 times a day, and they can't get any work done. Well, then it does become a problem, but that's not a disease, right?
Yeah.
And if they want some help, maybe somebody could help them come up with strategies to address the real issue, which is their anxiety and all the other stuff. But
so the problem with the DSM, which keeps growing and growing,
right?
The man who gave the lecture is Dr. James Davies, a British guy.
Oh, I know him. Yes.
Yeah. He said when they were putting the DSM-3 together, they were, they come up with the disease, then they name all the symptoms, and I think you've got to have something like 6 of the 9, and then you've got it. Doesn't matter what 6. And one of them, someone in the room said, yeah, but I've got that. So they scrubbed it out. I mean, this is the level of it. And I think you can probably confirm this, but I think it was the DSM-3. 100% of the people that worked on the the expanded edition were involved in big pharma. 100% of them.
That's right, Chris. You've got that down. In other words, there was a financial link, and that's scary. It's
terrifying. And by the DSM-5, I think that James Davies said that they said, oh, we've got to do something about this, and they took it down to 23% of the people, which is still, this is mad, because they're making diseases so that they can treat them, so that they can sell drugs.
Exactly.
And that's it. That's, I can't prove that, but that's what I'm learning.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Chris. And I just wish more people would become aware of this, because psychiatry is a scam. It's just an incredible scam. For example, what's very frustrating for me and some of my colleagues, Dr. Richard Vatz at Towson and I write articles on this and others, is that people use these diagnoses for all kinds of purposes. And they're very, like Davies, for example, I think he's written on addiction too, right?
I don't know. I only saw that one lecture.
Well, he and I are very much in agreement on a lot of these things.
Yeah,
you could have 200 symptoms checked off, but that's still not a good way to diagnose disease. You have to have a sign, right? When I was diagnosed with cancer, there were no symptoms. There just were no symptoms there. They said, well, how do you feel? And I go, I feel fine, But then they said, well, you have this cancer in your blood. And I go, well, let's have at it. But it didn't have anything to do with, well, I dream about Jeannie on X, Y, and Z nights or whatever it is. Symptoms and signs are very different, and people equate the two, right?
Yeah, for sure. Did you see... I think maybe not your cup of tea, but the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial.
Yeah, I watched part of it. Yes.
Well, the DSM-5 came out so many times.
Right.
What was interesting for me was, obviously my narcissism made me think I could be the best prosecuting attorney ever when I watch those things. I know what to say there.
Right.
But the one thing that wasn't questioned was the validity of the DSM-5.
Good.
And so, they were just saying, did she have 5 of the 8 things to have histrionic character something?
Right.
And they had these psychiatrists come on, and one said she has got histrionic personality disorder because she was these 5 things, and the other one come and said she hasn't got these 2, she's got this one. And the whole thing was kind of falling apart because of the fiction at the heart of it.
Exactly.
It was like they were dancing Ring of Roses around this sort of book of fairy stories, and this was a court of law.
Right.
And that's why in that introductory piece, the really powerful bit is when you say this is about power.
Right.
And we've already spoken about money, but you know, I've read you before talking about, and this terrifies me because I haven't been normal in my life. I've sort of, I've stepped outside the mainstream a few times with my behaviors, but being treated without your consent, and we've just had it all with the COVID as well. I mean, didn't you get COVID and pneumonia while you had cancer?
Yep. You have a good memory. No, I didn't have pneumonia, but I did have COVID. I didn't really notice it, but they did a test by choice, and it said that I was positive. So you're right. But once you have cancer, you tend to be more susceptible to other. But I made it through. I'm okay.
You're bulletproof, Jeffrey. It's incredible.
Well,
I mean, what a lot of people in the chat might not know is when Jeffrey wrote Addiction is a Choice, of course, for years, loads of addicts were saying to him, yeah, but you don't know what it's like. Well, then when, I don't know how old you were, but Jeff ended up on a very high amount of methadone for back problems.
Right.
And got off it, tapered off it. And so then when the addicts will say, you don't know what it's like. And, well, actually, I do. I come off methadone, which is one of the hardest. That's up there.
Well, I said to my doctors, this isn't ending. After a year or two, you always increase it. It's obviously not curing anything. And one of the side effects I found of opiates is that it tends to have a disinhibiting effect, though. What that means is that I tend to say things that usually get me in trouble. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be bothered by that. But sometimes speaking truth to power can get you into hot water.
Jeff, how much were you on? How much were you on at the end of that treatment when you decided to stop?
I think it was something like 14 milligrams a day, but I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But I've gone through it again, Chris, because my back got so bad. I said to one pain doctor, that was caused by the chemotherapy. Chemotherapy has a lot of weird effects. Brought back terrible pain. I said, I just need to go back on this again. Not morphine, not methadone, but morphine. I went on morphine for a couple months, and I said, okay, I've had enough. And I stopped again for several months. I'm not saying that withdrawal doesn't occur, because I went through terrible withdrawal on both drugs. But
for sure,
bottom line is that I was intent on giving this up, so I just bit the bullet and did what was necessary and let it go.
Yeah.
I see different reasons for why people use any of those drugs. The one that usually gets people in trouble is when they're using the drug to numb themselves to some kind of social, political, psychological problem. In other words, if a person's stuck in a miserable job and he needs to change or needs to do something different with his life, for whatever reason, he may just start using too much marijuana or whatever drug that they're using, maybe some kind of opiate. But if you're using it for a physical problem, for example, I used it for physical problems, and I tell my brother, who's a doctor, and my oncologist, and I just saw my primary care physician yesterday. I said, I feel no euphoria from this drug. It's just a matter of the drug going right to where I need it for the pain. And that's correct.
It's interesting because when I first started using heroin when I was early 20s, there was a group of us, about 8 of us, and we'd go up into central London, buy a load, get back, and we'd all do it. And two of us just took to it like ducks to water.
Sure.
because there was emotional pain that hadn't been dealt with.
Right.
There were, and so when you take the opiate, there's something there you don't want to think about, and so
Right.
it gets rid of it. But the other 6 blokes didn't have that. They were quite happy with their lives. They were quite happy with their lot.
Right.
So the next day, when I said, "Well, should we, let's start again?"
Right.
Six of them were like, "No, it's not worth the hassle." Whereas me and the other bloke were on it 20, 30 years after that,
Right.
Whereas the rest of them weren't interested. They didn't have the emotional issues that needed, sedating.
Right.
But that's what's weird. I don't want to talk about drugs because we've done that last time, but that's what's weird about opiates. They kill emotional and physical pain, which is why I think it's problematic with treating people. Anyway, let's go back to the DSM-5. So 20% of British people were prescribed drugs in 2016 for depression and anxiety. I find that terrifying.
Right.
It's a terrifying number. I can't imagine what it is in the States. Your man James Davis said that although in England they're not allowed to promote drugs to people like they are in America, you have adverts on the television, on cable and things, don't you, of an actual brand name drug.
Right.
And I've actually got one here. Let me just show you this. It's only a minute long, people, but I want you to watch this because I just got to remember the company. I don't want to get it wrong and get sued for everything I haven't got. But Jeff, if you know this, don't let the cat out of the bag.
Talking about oxycodone and the sac.
No, this is going to be Sarafem.
Oh yeah, I can't remember if that's related. Actually, somebody just sent me the book about them. I can't remember the name of the drug, but doesn't matter. Go ahead.
So people, this was a drug that was released, and it was called Sarafem. Now, I think a lot of the women and a lot of the men will understand what they're getting at because it's not disguised at all. It's only a minute long, so 1 second. You should have audio. Here we go.
Yep.
Think about the week before your period. Do you feel irritability, tension, tiredness? Think it's PMS? Think again. It could be PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. You know, those intense mood and physical symptoms the week before your period. Sound familiar? Call to get free information about PMDD and a treatment your doctor has to relieve its symptoms. Why put up with this another month?
Right.
It's back. The week before your period. Mood swings, bloating, irritability. Think it's PMS?
Did you take my keys?
Maybe it's PMDD. Those intense mood and physical symptoms right before your period.
Right, you get the idea. We don't need to see any more of that. They actually put out 4 different adverts for this new drug, Sarafem. And they renamed post-menstrual tension into what, I can't even remember what they called it there. But the drug, Sarafem, which comes in a lovely little violet package and looks all feminine, is Prozac. It's Prozac. It's just Prozac.
Right.
And that's how easy it is. And they sold billions. These things were, women thought, oh, I've got that. I've got that. Or the husband would say, you've got that.
Right.
Go and see your doctor. The doctor's happy to give you your script and get his money. And it was just a rebranded Prozac. I find that astonishing. And of course, you can only do that when the doctor can look in his book and say, oh, here it is, PMDDT or whatever they called it. Yeah, it's here in the DSM-5. Are you irritable? Are you this? Are you this? Here's your Sarafem.
No, I understand. One thing that brings to mind is that ultimately what the drug manufacturers allege is that there are some physical symptoms that direct them, as they say, to administering this drug, right? In other words, if you have certain, signs, then you need the drug, and often they want to go genetics. Like, oh, there's a genetic tendency. And my response is, we're all genetically programmed to die. Does that mean that life is a disease? Right? I mean, what's the cutoff point? Somebody dies at 60, 70, whatever, and genes may have a lot to do with it. But does that mean that they were sick? I mean, and psychiatrists and sympathizers to psychiatrists use this type of horrible thinking to justify doing things to people that ultimately the psychiatrists and mental health professionals benefit from. There's an old saying, cui bono, who benefits here? Well, it's always the mental health professional. It's like, what people ask me if I like to gamble and go to Las Vegas, and I said, no. I mean, it seems fun to watch somebody else, but the worst thing that could happen to me is that I might win. And the thing is that, do you remember the movie Casino with Robert De Niro? And
yes.
I mean, and one of the things that De Niro mentioned over and over again is that the house always wins, right? It's an illusion to think that you're going to win in the long run. And, when it comes to these psychiatric drugs, which are horrible, they cause all kinds of problems. But again, I feel like if that's what you want to take, go ahead and do it. Is that they produce side effects that are very dangerous, like what's the other tardive dyskinesia and all these things.
But there's also the I think what's at the core of it that really worries me is the pathologization and the medicalization of behavior.
Right.
And so when you said about we all die. So, and when you said where do we draw the line, I thought you meant it in a different way. I thought where do you draw the line is, well, I mean, where do you draw the line? Someone might be exhibiting a lot of anger. Right. But their life might be in a situation where their job the people they work with might be very irritating. Their family life might be dysfunctional. So they are angry. But then if the DSM makes up these, if you exhibit this, suddenly you've got a disease, there's your tablet. It's likely to be a suppressant or an SSRI. More money for Big Pharma, you're numbed out, so you're not getting to express the anger. If you don't get to, this is just behavior.
Exactly.
And so, and it's real Brave New World stuff. You're not feeling good, have some Soma. We will all be all right. Everyone will be on that flat line of, we lose our individuality and our personality.
Right. Absolutely, Chris. You've got your finger spot on there. That's true.
But Jeffrey, what I want to ask you is, because when I'm really clearly no expert, but when I talk to people about this and try and breach this conversation, and I talk about ADHD because luckily I'm a bit too old to have got nabbed with that one as a child. Had it been about then, I probably would have been on the Ritalin or whatever. But when I look at ADHD, I don't think they've got an attention deficit disorder. I think they're deficit of attention. And what tends to happen is, as a 6-year-old boy, I was put in a largely feminine education system where you learn from books.
Right.
I'm looking outside at the woods. I want to be swinging on ropes, jumping in the river, and I'm bored out of my head because I've finished all the work before everyone else in the class. And so then I start playing up. Then I start throwing things at people.
Right.
Then I get to go and see the school's social worker. And then I go and see a therapist. And I've seen this in other kids. Now you're getting attention. Now your parents are looking at you as because you've got this problem. So they
Right.
give you your Ritalin, but alongside the Ritalin, you're getting more attention because now the teachers think you're special, and so you're getting treatment. But I would suggest that the treatment that's probably doing you the most good is getting some attention that
Very
some.
That's very perceptive, Chris. That's very perceptive. I hadn't even thought of that, but I think you're absolutely right. Another point that I bring up with this attention deficit nonsense is that people claim that they can't concentrate, right? And if I say, well, whatever orientation, I don't give a damn what I say. Are you heterosexual? And they go, yeah. Or homosexual, it doesn't matter to me. And if you don't seem to have any problem focusing on a beautiful, sexy, naked woman,
Well, there you go.
you don't have your attention deficit when you're doing that.
Yeah.
Well, because, and I said, why is that? And they said, well, I'm interested in that. And I said, well, that's my point exactly. And nobody wants to say the academic environment is incredibly boring.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want to focus. I mean, I went through that in school. I hated school. I despised it. And I wouldn't concentrate. I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with something like that. But it was only when I found something that was truly relevant to my life that I wanted to focus on. And that occurred, unfortunately, in graduate school. So high school and undergraduate was kind of a waste. But once I discovered what I really wanted to do, I didn't have any trouble focusing on that.
Exactly the same here, and I've got a synchronized example.
Okay.
In maths, I was literally driven to distraction. That's when I started throwing things, smashing windows. I got put in the. I wasn't getting any attention. I wasn't interested. They put me in the corridor on my own, which made things worse because now I've got nothing. And so then I caused more problems to get more attention. 1 hour later in the art class, obsessively working because I loved it, because I was interested in it. It was only an hour later, 2 different children.
Right.
The first one needs medication, needs electric shock therapy. But the second one you'd think was the star pupil, just absolutely into it.
Right.
And the amount of kids, I know friends who've got children who are on drugs, and I haven't had children, so I don't know. That's got to be a lot of difficult decisions to make. But they are a little bit. I sense a bit of guilt from them when they say, well, he has changed a bit since the medication, but he has calmed down.
Right.
And I'm sort of like, yeah, but at what cost?
That's exactly right. I mean, let's be clear. I think we talked about this on the other show. Drugs have effects on people's bodies. That's not in question. If you take a sedative, you may very well calm down. If you're sleeping all the time, you may very well be stimulated to stay awake. And what I've always said is that if marijuana makes you feel better, were you suffering from marijuana deficiency? This is the way mental health professionals twist things around to serve their own purposes in the name of serving their patients. Say, can we take a quick break for a minute or two? I got to make a quick pit stop.
Yeah, of course, Jeffrey. Go on.
I'll be right there.
No problem. Well, people, we managed to, I don't want to say we managed to pull it off if Jeff's having a pit stop, as he called it, but incredible. Liam in the chat, was that you that sent me that James Davis? I'll put the link to that. And if this is your cup of tea, people, Liam said to me, Chris, if you can get this in before watching, before Jeffrey comes on, I think you should. And I literally just about, I actually had an extra day, but we'll discuss that another time. it's fascinating, and just the numbers: 20% of Brits are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. A fifth, 1 in 5 people is on some kind of soma. You're not happy. A donation. Amazing. Nice one, RP. Doing good, Chris. Keep going. I must admit, Raymond, that it did. That I had some other little issues on. I'll tell you about them on tomorrow's stream, or maybe at the end. So I wasn't settled properly anyway, and I thought that I might get. For a while there, I thought there might still be some repercussions, but I also get a little bit in awe of Jeff. He is a bit of a hero, and getting him on here again is incredible. So I felt a bit embarrassed for messing it up. Nice one, Raymond. I appreciate that. Lovely comments coming through. Nice one, RMF. Nice one, JP. Nice one, Grego. I mean, feel free to ask some questions. Here he is. I'll put his mic back on. So,
Okay.
so all better? All good?
Yes.
What did you do? Go and cook up a quick hit? Bosh,
No.
quick one in the arm.
I took a piss, but I put it back.
So the issue that I get when I discuss this, and like I said to you, I say it's not hyperactivity attention deficit disorder. They're just attention deficit. And so people say to me then, are you saying mental illnesses don't exist? And
I am.
right, so you are. So that's interesting, because it's at that point I reach my sort of, that's out of my pay grade. You know, I don't know where to go from there.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't think ADHD exists. I think it's behavioral and environmental. It's a response to an environment. I don't think that needs Ritalin. Like that's, you know, but that's because I experienced that myself. So can I have your take on that? Because that's what a lot of, by the way, when you're having a quick wee, many people were saying this is great, loving it, great guest. So that's always encouraging. So what's your take on that? So you are saying that mental illnesses.
Well, right from the get-go, Chris, let's take when you write a research paper, you always begin with what are called operational definitions or terms. In other words, what do you mean by X? What do you mean by Y? And the authors, if they're responsible, say by X we mean this, by Y we mean this. Now you have to be consistent there. Now, when we talk about mental illness, first we have to define mental, and then we have to define illness, don't we?
Yeah.
So I'll jump right to the end, and then people can call in. I'd love for them I'd love to handle their questions. Yeah. Mind does not exist. People always confuse mind with brain, but the two are completely different. Only the brain can be ill or sick. Only biological processes can be sick with abnormal cell structure and function. But the mind is invisible. It's non-existent, even though we keep saying, I have a mind to do this, that. By mind, we mean really a verb. It's something that you are minding, you are doing something. But it's not a thing the way the brain is. Now, brain diseases actually exist. Of course they do. I mean, this is where people who attack me just don't make any sense. They say, are you saying that Parkinson's and glioblastoma, a friend of mine has that, a very terrible cancer of the brain, don't exist? I said, absolutely not. Don't treat me like I'm an idiot. Of course they exist. But that's different from mind. Mind is something else. I don't know how else to say it. When people say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, how about this? Mind is that represented by the pronoun I.
Right.
And people say, that's a tough one. They keep chewing on that for years. Fortunately, I had a good teacher who taught me about that. But then the second thing is, what is illness or disease? Well, it's very different. We say that cancer is a disease. There are all kinds of things that are real diseases. But what are we talking about? We're talking about things that are discovered primarily as signs. In other words, they are physical. They usually are some kind of cellular abnormality. So when you combine those two terms, it really doesn't make any sense. Mind is non-existent. Illness or disease does exist. So I don't know. I always stop people right off and say, well, what do you mean by mental illness?
Okay, so what you're saying is you're combining essentially an abstract idea with a physical sign.
Exactly. That's
which
exactly.
they don't work together, do they? So mental.
Well, they don't work together. And a famous British philosopher, God dang, who wrote Category Errors?
Bertrand Russell?
No.
There's not many.
No, but this was a big one. He said you can't combine these two categories. Oh, category of mind. Somebody on the air can help me out here. I can't remember his name. I've written that. But the point is that he said you cannot accurately speak of mind in relation to illness. I say they're two different substances, phenomena, completely different. So you can't even predict nor correlate the two.
It's like having a dream illness or a hate illness,
or spring fever, or a screwdriver, which is a drink. I mean, I'll have a screwdriver, please. Well, are they going to bring you a physical screwdriver? No. That's where, and Tom Zoss, in his brilliance, pointed out that you're combining things that are metaphors with things that are literal. You can't do that and make sense.
So we've got. So it's about. So I have said before, if you've got 50 kids, right, and 49 of them are exhibiting behaviors that would be called ADHD, 49 right, of them are, and one of them isn't, well, in that situation, who's got the problem? And it's probably going to be the one who isn't, because he's out of the norm. Right. So that goes back to what I was just saying about Brave New World, because what the logical conclusion of this kind of thinking is that we medicate everyone into line.
Right.
And that's awful medical tyranny. That's right, terrifying.
Right.
That terrifies me.
It does, and it should.
Thomas, and it's happening. It's happening with 1/5 of British people on antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs, and it was only something like 5% in 20 years previously. This is moving fast, and the whole OxyContin thing. I mean, did you watch Dope Sick?
No.
Have you seen? You'll enjoy it. It's about the Sackler family promoting OxyContin. And they lied. They made stuff up. If it stops, it's quite amazing the marketing they done and the way they promoted it to all their salesmen. Getting out to doctors, and if you got rid of more, they sent you on holiday and all this. But if your OxyContin, which is essentially laboratory made heroin, you can snort it, you can smoke it, you can inject it. I mean, if it stops working, the Sackler people, I'm going to say allegedly to protect my legal situation, according to Dope Sick, they came up with this thing that if it stops working, if someone in the chat might be able to remind me, they called it, that's your breakthrough pain point. And if you reach that, you have to double the dose.
Right. No, I understand. What do they call it? There's another name, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, awful.
Which is just a fancy way of saying take more of the drug, right?
Yeah, twice as much and pay for it. Jeffrey, we call Billy Niggling Billy, but he says this. He says, I think that'll be Jeffrey, is throwing the baby out with the bathwater with his statement that mental illnesses don't exist.
Right.
I mean, I don't know why you're saying that, Bill.
I can say it's not the first time somebody has said that to me, so it's not a shock. Go ahead. Tell me why I'm...
Yeah, Bill, you'll have to explain why, because you've just there's no evidence there. Skin and Tonic, hello mate. What do you think about schizophrenia? What's your stance on that? Is that a mental illness, or again, am I asking a question that can't exist because I'm comparing an abstract and a?
Well, let's break this down. Okay, I'm glad somebody said that. Asked that.
I'll leave it on the screen.
What are the characteristics of what is called schizophrenia? I'll help this along. Generally, a person acts in some kind of peculiar way, and they claim to be hearing voices or seeing things that are not there, right?
Yeah.
Now, Jesus has come into my heart. I used to use the example in class. There are pink elephants walking upside down on the ceiling, blah, blah, blah. Those are called hallucinations or self-reported imaginings. Okay? Now, I always cut right to the chase and say, Jesus has entered my heart. Does that mean that I'm schizophrenic? Or am I having a valued religious experience? And some of my students woke up on that and said, well, it really doesn't matter as long as you leave them alone, right? What happens is that if you say something that's taboo, the government, because that has the power, will use that to say that you're schizophrenic, mentally ill, you can't control your behavior, you're a threat to yourself and others, and we'll put you into a hospital and load you full of antipsychotic medication. My God, when we keep pumping you with that, you stop claiming that Jesus has entered your heart or that they're pink elephants, so it must be a cure. No, that's not the way science works. It's not the way it's supposed to work. But what are we going to do? Because all religious belief depends on hallucination.
Yeah.
And now people usually counter and say, oh, well, there are good hallucinations and there are bad ones. People with schizophrenic hallucinations they tend to harm other people, which in fact is untrue. But I point out, are you saying that people who have religious hallucinations don't harm others? Because I think more throats have been slit throughout
the name of religion. Yeah.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
What are we going to say? So it's kind of a political majority rules here. I think one of the issues that people mistake in terms of my argument and the arguments of my colleagues is that if people want to believe certain things and say certain things are true that sound crazy, I think we should just leave them alone. But and if they harm other people, then that's a criminal justice issue.
And there's already things in place to deal with that. So
right.
you wouldn't say that people have schizophrenia?
No, because I don't know what schizophrenia is.
So if someone said to you, this person has been diagnosed with schizophrenia by that's psychiatry, isn't it? You'd say they're just
lying.
Go on. What would you say? What?
Well, the first thing,
did you say fine? Then they're fine.
No, I wouldn't say they're fine because the people do act in ways that bother me. There's no question about that. I think Donald Trump may be, quote, mentally ill by all kinds of descriptions of mental illness, and most politicians are crazy as far as I can see. But we don't put them away. That was one of the things I objected to here in the States, was that Jamie Raskin, who's a congressman in Maryland, kept saying Trump is mentally ill and we've got to remove him from power. And I said, no, I can't stand Trump, but don't use that argument because you'll remove responsibility for his actions as a result. If he's done something illegal, then take him out on that basis, but not because of your diagnosis of mental illness. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Because
I do get it. So again, it's just a behavioural thing. It's just an individual thing, and they are quantitatively more different than it gets complicated because I keep having to come back to an idea of normal, which I don't actually believe in.
Right.
So,
no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, look, I don't mean to be simplistic. I mean, that would be like dismissing Hitler's actions as just behaviors, you know? I mean, he was a very dangerous person. And people who think in bizarre ways and have the power to implement some kind of policy as a result are very dangerous persons. But we must follow the law in some ways, you know? We have to stick by what we call the rule of law, which is similar to what's in the UK. That's a mark of what we call a civilized society. Look, I don't want to get into a big debate about what's a civilized society because, frankly, I've been a vegetarian for 50 years, and I'm extremely upset about the harm done to all sentient beings. And I abide by what are called the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, which is, you know, the world is suffering and don't perpetuate suffering. But, and I agree, but causing harm in others is not a disease. I mean, if you want to deprive them of their right to do that, then you're going to have to find some other way of justifying restricting their freedom, is the way I look at it.
Which also doesn't relinquish the responsibility at the same time, because that's kind of a double bind, isn't it?
Right.
So if you had your way, what would be done with psychiatry?
Good. I would prohibit psychiatrists from testifying in court.
That's really interesting.
And that's what Thomas Zoss and I agreed on. I mean, I was very fortunate. I've always had very good teachers who, for some reason, took me under their wing. And I know it sounds demeaning of myself, but I don't want to say blessed, but I ran into people like Tom and others, and they just grabbed on.
No, I fully understand the power of a mentor in your life. Incredible.
Well, and Tom, when I said Tom was my mentor, he quickly interrupted and said, "I'm not your mentor, I'm your friend." But
which made him even more of a mentor to you.
That's true. And I once gave a speech introducing him at some place, and I said, you know, one of the things that's interesting about Tom is that as a friend, sometimes a teacher can masquerade non-intentionally as just a teacher, but he became a very true, dear friend. Anyway, people would say, well, didn't you argue with him about anything? And I said, sure, we argued about different things all the time. Because they wanted to try to say that I was following the Thomas Zoss cult, which I absolutely was not. But one of the things that we disagreed on is exactly the question, or the answer to the question that you've just made, Chris, and that is, well, what do we do next? And I bring this up in my last book called Thomas Zoss, The Man and His Ideas. And I said to Tom, we must prohibit something called legal fiction in the courtrooms. In other words, legal fiction is a legal concept. I don't mean to go on about this, but basically, it's the idea that somebody can say that something is true that is false, and the court will not throw it out. In other words, back before the Civil War, the perfect example of legal fiction in the United States was the idea that blacks could be 4/5 persons. Was it 4/5 or 3/5? Anyway, that was used to justify slavery and representation in Congress, etc. And obviously, no one can be a partial person, but people who supported slavery would not allow this to be disproved. And since that time, the most popular legal fiction is the idea that people can be mentally ill. when there's no thing as mind, etc. And in other words, I can say in the court, this person is mentally ill, even though it doesn't exist. And if somebody challenges me, the court will protect my right to say that, and that it really is true. And what I said to Tom was, we've got to prohibit legal fiction. In other words, when people say that mental illness exists, we've got to throw it out in court, because they're just keeping it in there on the basis of legal authority, which is just unfortunate. And Tom said, it'll never happen, Jeff. The bottom line is we've got to get the damn psychiatrists out of the courtroom, period. Because they'll say anything. They'll say anything, and they'll influence power. And I agree, whichever way.
And they really did in that Johnny Depp trial. They really did.
Yeah.
It was instrumental. Jeff, here's something interesting. I think, Liam, this is what you've missed. Liam, thank you for that donation. Liam says this: we were talking about schizophrenia, etc., last night in the lifeboat. That's a chat group we have.
Yeah.
Those people tend to respond to lithium. So it could simply be lithium deficiency in a lot of cases. But Liam, that's what we're talking about. It could be they have less lithium than other people. But why are you wanting to give them lithium to make them like other people? Because then you've got to establish a norm.
Right.
And then how wide is that norm? How narrow is that norm? And then who else is outside of it? Oh, there's someone else here who's deficient. Oh, I'm deficient in opioids. The government should give me heroin. Someone else is deficient in some, and we end up all becoming the same. And I think that's the argument. One of the arguments Jeffrey has been making all his life is, it's behavioural. It's not you can't have a. I really like that. If I've learned anything tonight, it's that the mind is an abstract thing that can't be ill.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. It's really landed on me, that one.
Well, another way of looking at it is that the mind can be sick or diseased only in a metaphorical sense.
Yeah, but that's almost poetic.
Well, it is poetic. Yeah, I agree. It's not all. It is. And
people do go to court and they get away. What's the phrase? What's the actual defense? What do they call it?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
When they were mental at the time. There's that defense, but there's a phrase they use. Oh, I can't think. Maybe someone in the chat. Right. But yeah, they go to court. They've murdered someone, and their solicitor, usually with the help of a psychiatrist,
right?
They weren't. I'm sure it will come back to me. But people do get reduced sentences. They get other kinds of things because they were mentally ill during that moment.
Temporarily insane.
There you go. Temporary insanity. Thank you, Billy. And that one as well, Rob. Diminished responsibilities is another one here.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, Rob. Right. Yeah, hey, I'm seeing all the messages now. Great. No, you're absolutely right. There are variations on the insanity defense, but there's always implicit this idea that the person allegedly does not know what he's doing, and or does not know the difference between right and wrong, and or they could not restrict their behavior to the dictates of law. Those are the three variations. The last one is called loss of control. But juries are basically instructed to decide which of these is true, but there's no way of figuring that out. I mean, how can you tell whether someone really didn't know what he was doing? I mean, obviously there are cases when a person is incompetent in the sense that he has a true brain disease and he cannot tell what's going on around him. I mean, that's true. If you have a disease like Alzheimer's or some form of dementia caused by an injury, or if you have what's called multi-infarct dementia, many different strokes in your brain or tumors in your brain. It's going to affect your ability to perceive yourself and others. That there's no question about that.
Sure, but that's a
Those,
brain.
those are called organic mental disorders. In other words, we have a link with something physical that is a sign, and we know that it really exists. There's no question about that. But if you don't have that evidence, I mean, why is it allegedly the person can't tell the difference between what he's doing and what he's not, or that he's doing something wrong? I've never seen that happen. And when, you know,
and the interesting thing with the diminished responsibility ones is that, and the temporary nature of it. They didn't know what they were doing then,
right?
But they know that it's wrong now.
Right. That's convenient, isn't it? Sure. Exactly. No, I agree. So what then must, I think Luke said that, what then must we do? I think we have to be honest with ourselves and other people, and recognize that some people are telling the truth about these issues, and that truth is based on evidence, and others are manufacturing madness and truth, and there's no evidence to support the things that they're asserting.
Which goes back again to psychiatry. So can you just tell me again what the difference between your and Thomas Saz's was? You said we've got to get Thomas said we've got to get the psychiatrists out of courts.
Right.
Or was that yours?
No, that's right. I mean, it wasn't a serious disagreement. He said, I'll not win with my argument focused on eliminating legal fiction.
Okay, that's right.
We've got to get the damn psychiatrists out of there because they're not qualified as officers of the court. I'm not exactly sure how we can do that, but the bottom line is, however you do it, you've got to get the damn psychiatrists out of the court. And Tom wrote extensively about this in the sense that he invented the term called the therapeutic state, where he asserted that priests joined with the state have now been replaced by pseudo priests called psychiatrists.
Yeah.
And they have the authority that priests had in the former theocratic state. You understand? I mean, this is very important. And in the states, we have something called the First Amendment, where the first two lines are Congress shall make no law restricting, Congress shall make no law establishing the religion or practicing the free exercise thereof. In other words, Congress can't touch anything that's religious. And that's why I was the consultant in a case where when the state ordered people into Alcoholics Anonymous, we showed that AA was a religion. It met the legal criteria of religion. So the state cannot force you into that because they're touching religion, one. And the defendant in our case was an atheist. And he said, I don't want to believe in a higher power. I don't want to.
I've been through all that.
Ultimately, in terms of arguments against the therapeutic state, whereas psychiatry comes about, is we've got to show that psychiatry is dictating a particular self-concept and a way to think about yourself. And I don't think the state has any business doing that. You know?
And of course, you're going up against one hell of a. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of lobbying there. There's a lot of political support there. There's not a lot of motivation on the other side for people to do much about this. Whereas, as far as I can see, there's a lot of motivation for people to be supporting psychiatry, the DSM, the prescription of drugs, and less and less regulation, because it's like you say, it's a fiction.
Right.
It's
I
terrifying.
I jokingly say it's an unfair battle, 200 against one me, and I demolished them. So with us and others, it's like.
How many of you are there, Jeffrey? How many of you are there in your camp? Because you're fighting the likes of Pfizer, aren't you? Your enemies are a big deal.
obviously I don't know exact numbers, but I think if you interview people, um, and when people have done that in the past, most people know that the mind is not physical. They know that mental illnesses don't exist. And moreover, they know that we cannot remove responsibility for people's behavior. That's the bottom line. I saw a great cartoon last week or this week in the New Yorker, and this one boy is talking to his parents and says, it doesn't matter whether it's nature or nurture. You're still responsible for your behavior.
Yeah.
And, it was great. I sent that around to my friends. I said, this is beyond funny. It's so true. People try to say, well, it's the environment that made him do it. This was a great song in West Side Story called Officer Krupke. Why are we such delinquents? It's because we ain't had a normal home. Hey, we're what do they say? We ain't had a normal home. That was the bottom line. But
So
go ahead.
Jeff, here's an interesting one, because I've noticed Skin and Tonic. He's a good lad, and he said he's alluded to this previously in this chat. He says it's very easy to say all this when you have no experience with people who have this problem. And I think if I'm right, this fella's got someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia in his life. So what he's saying is it's all very well having arguments, but when you've got someone like
Sure.
this, so what would you say to that?
First, fair enough. I don't know how you know that I've not been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Fair point.
Right. And that doesn't qualify me as an expert. I mean, we have to agree on a certain kind of language in terms of communication and truth. I've certainly been told that I'm crazy. Thomas Zoss was told that he was crazy, and that's kind of brings us back to the title of this show, and that is that diagnosis ends up being a weapon. The famous libertarian economist wrote an essay called "Diagnosis as a Weapon," and that's the way you try to undermine someone else's argument, through some ad hominem means. In other words, I know that you're wrong because of your character, or I know that I'm right because of your character, but that's not the way we establish truth. We have to establish and agree on what the term schizophrenia means. What if you're going to say that I'm mentally ill? On what basis would you say that? What is your name? Skin and Tonic? I forgot.
Yeah.
Skin will do. How would you decide that I'm not schizophrenic? Because many people will agree with you, but the basis of their criticism is that I'm presenting some kind of politically incorrect idea. And historically, that's what's going on here in the States and elsewhere. If you want to discredit someone, just get some experts and say the guy's crazy. But how do you really establish that? Skin and Tonic, please tell me. Tell us.
I've had this with the disease model of addiction when people have said to me, they said, no, but it's helping him. Don't give him this argument about it being a choice. I said, yeah, but it's helping him on false foundations.
Right.
Because he's believing in a myth. And I tell you, once that all falls apart, he'll be back to square one. Wouldn't you like some actual reality which might get him out of this mess? Because at the moment, you're saying to him, it's not anything to do with his decisions, or his behaviors, or his choices. He's got a disease.
Right.
And when I was a street junkie, that's how I defended my using, because I had a problem. I had the disease of addiction. Now, what I'd say to you, Skin and Tonic, I feel for you, because I know people who've been diagnosed with schizophrenia and they're hard work. But I think, Skin, if you were to look at the terrible the terrible history of the DSM, and how weak it is, and how sort of just embarrassing and financially motivated by big pharma.
Right.
The treatment this person in your family is getting, I would suggest, has been held back for decades now for money. And so while I understand what you're saying and I feel for you, if this had been approached differently 50 years ago, people with those kinds of behaviors might be in a better situation now than they are.
Right.
Because they've been sold a lie, and it's all what psychiatry is and what the DSM is. You know, these people were 100% of them were part of big pharma when they were making up all these diseases.
Right.
You know, if someone's got behaviors that are causing them and other people around them huge discomfort,
right,
you know, I think you'd want to find out why, rather than just drug them up and tolerate a semi sort of, well, he's a zombie now, but you know, it's sort of better,
right?
Because it's not gonna develop from there. There's no money in actually addressing the real problem of someone's bad behavior. There's money in giving them drugs.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, skin and tonic, I want you to understand that we have to differentiate between what we call treatment for mental illness and mental illness or schizophrenia itself. And treatment is a very vague concept. It doesn't mean that you give them certain drugs that returns to some semblance of normality. That's not what successful treatment is. And anything could basically, that helps a person can be called treatment. But again, that doesn't mean that the person has to take it or should be forced to take it. I've certainly worked with people that other psychiatrists would diagnose and had to diagnose as schizophrenic. But there's not much reliability, you should know, where one group of people agree the person is schizophrenic and others say, no, he's got a severe case of manic depression or whatever it is. There's no agreement. That's like saying, well, does the person have tuberculosis or does he have diabetes? I mean, it makes a big difference. I've helped people that were forced into shock therapy and very, very strong antipsychotic medications, and they were told that they would have to be on these for the rest of their lives. And the client who came to see me asked whether I supported that, and I said, look, if you want to take that, go ahead and do it. That's not my cup of tea. I prefer that you not, because I think that they block insight and consciousness in many ways. But that's just my opinion. And he went off of years of being on these drugs within probably a month of talking to me, and then stayed in analysis with me for, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, something like that, and gave up all of those medicines. I mean, they can give them up and function quite well. This brings me to kind of like an ultimate point, which is why I call myself existential psychoanalyst. I think that if you really look deep inside yourself, that many of the things that, quote, cause what are referred to as mental illnesses have something to do with their fear of death, fear of meaninglessness in their lives, fear of freedom, and what's the other? Isolation, for what are called existential anxieties. And when you start talking with people on a deep level like that, even though they may not want to talk about it, those are the things that are most relevant to their experience of life. And they're very difficult, as we all know.
And the one thing you're going to struggle to do with someone who's on a lot of medication is talk
Right.
to them on a deep level.
Exactly.
It kind of makes it impossible.
Well, yeah, I had a guy many years ago who kept wanting to work with me, and I tried, but I finally said, you're taking so many drugs that you can't even tell me how you feel, you know? You're going to have to bite the bullet and give them up, and then let's talk about how you really feel. And he said, well, I'm too scared. And I said, I'm sorry. I tried to help him with that, but I said, you're wasting your money. So it's
I've had-
hard if you're going to blocking, because all these drugs block feeling, and
Yep.
you know, you need to recognize certain feelings that you have and why they are relevant to the complaint that you have, all of that. But it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy at all. And when I say these are simple insights, I don't mean that they're easy insights at all.
No, we're talking about human behavior. It
Right.
probably doesn't get more complicated.
Exactly.
A lot of people have said to me, thank you for that donation. Thank you, Hans. I'll deal with it at the end. I've had a lot of people say to me, yeah, but you can say that about ADHD, but schizophrenics have killed themselves and schizophrenics have killed other people. Well, people who haven't been diagnosed with schizophrenia have killed themselves and
Right.
killed other people. I don't necessarily think that is a fair argument. Now, skin and tonic, I want to say, though, and I don't want to speak for Jeffrey as well here, but I'm guessing Ed probably agree. I'm not saying that it isn't a fucking difficult, excuse my French, to be around someone with extreme behavioural
Right.
issues. You know, that can ruin your life to have that. And so when they drug them up and they calm down, I can understand that there's a sense of comfort there. I think the point is what is being treated,
Right.
and then again how that on a societal level can be weaponized. There's power imbalances there. There's
Right.
money to be made from it, and you know. But I'm not taking anything away from, you know, my mum lived with a heroin addict for 20 years, and she went to bed and cried her eyes out every night. She wanted me to have a disease because it made her feel better about the situation. But the truth was,
wait, pause right there, Chris, because that's very important. And many parents and relatives of loved ones want to say that they have a disease because it's just so crazy to think that the person is acting the way he or she does because he wants to act that way. Now, that's not the same thing as saying he wants to be crazy. All I'm saying is when you engage, behavior is all voluntary, volitional. And I know I can hear people going, what the hell is he talking about? It's always volitional. Behavior is different than an epileptic seizure, right? Just because you're moving in space, well, it could be due to some kind of convulsion, and it could be because you want to act that way. I think we have to be clear about the volitional nature of behavior, which, if we look at the definitions of behavior, always refers back to the fact that the person wanted to act in X, Y, and Z way.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a joke or not, but have you read a book called The Minds of Billy Milligan? I don't know what that means. Skin and Tonics, I think it was a relative, a brother, that he killed himself. I mean, yeah, awful. I don't think anyone take anything away from that. You know, but
I'm unfamiliar with it, sorry.
What's that there, Jeff?
I said I'm unfamiliar with that book. I'm sorry.
No worries. If anyone's, I've had Jeffrey here for nearly 2 hours. If anyone's got questions, now's the time, because this wasn't scheduled. It's a day early. So if you've got any questions, now's the time, and I'll let Jeffrey go in 5 or 10 minutes if you're all right with that, Jeff.
Sure. And people can write to me if you want.
I've put Jeff's email. He kindly put his email. I'll put it in the description. So if you want to talk and ask Jeff any questions that you might not want to ask in the public forum, and Jeff suggested that email, so that's very kind of him. So if that's in the description of this video. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Let's see if there's any questions. Let's have a look over on entropy. Billy Blog says, what would you do? Now, we call this bloke Niggling Bill, by the way, Jeff. What would you do? Well, I think he's already answered this, Bill. What would you do if someone was begging for help with a mental illness if you think they don't exist? So if someone said to you, I've got ADHD, I need help, but I think you already answered it in your, well, what would you do then? They come
Well,
into
first of all, I don't understand what they mean by mental illness.
There
I
you
mean,
go.
if they say that, that's what does that mean? I might say, well, what's your experience? And then I help them identify that by saying they feel very anxious or they feel very depressed. They've lost their zest for life or whatever. Those are things that are often covered by anxiety and depression. But I might say, well, let's take a look. Maybe some drug would help you feel better and maybe not. Let's look at this from a very practical point of view. Why do you feel so depressed?
Yeah,
Right?
I don't think you really need to complicate the issue by going in
Colin,
with mental illness.
exactly.
It's not
That's my
necessary. This is quite important. Spybot said, I think the doc misunderstood what Skin and Tonic was saying. If that is the case, which it may well be because he's also got me in between complicating things, Skin and Tonic, feel free to write to Jeff. His email's in the description, and
right.
I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Sure.
Let's see what we've got here.
I saw, just before you go on to the next one, many people have seen the movie Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt and Anthony Hopkins. It's a terrific movie about a family out west. But Brad Pitt plays this character who's very, today he would clearly be called mentally ill, but an Indian who becomes a member of their family. I forget what his name is, but he's a terrific actor. He describes Brad Pitt as living with the bear. In other words, he's always struggling with a fear and anxiety that this guy calls the bear. And he actually has a relationship with a wild bear in there. But when I saw that the first time, I thought, this is just his version of what today we call mental illness.
There you go.
I mean, we have different languages and terms to help people understand why they behave the way they do. For example, people talk about memory all the time, and I point out, memory is not something that's physical. It may help us to create computer models of memory, but that's different from saying memory exists as specific cells in the brain. Absolutely not. Memory is part of mind. And that's a different. Oh, I remember the guy's name, Gilbert Ryle, Ryle, Gilbert Ryle, a British philosopher who wrote a book called Category Errors and Category Mistakes. And you can't talk about memory as a physical thing. It doesn't make any sense. He said those are two different categories of phenomena. And do you understand what I'm saying here? Because
Absolutely.
All right, I'm sorry.
I don't understand what Hans is saying, though. Thanks for the donation, Hans. I tried the Schaler treatment after my first schizo diagnosis. That didn't work out well. After my second, I take a monthly depot injection. No idea. Have you had a drink, Hans?
I don't listen. If somebody's trying to make money calling it the Schaler treatment, they need to send that money to me.
There you go. That's called trademark.
I mean,
let's see. Oh, John wraps it up as well as he usually does. We're fed constant fear porn and lies from media and big tech, medicated by big pharma. Yeah, I actually, for once, John, absolutely agree with you. They give us the problem, then they sell us the solution. Thanks.
There you go.
Yeah. Let me see if there's any more questions.
Well, that's why
a good call, John.
Mental health professionals are constantly, quote, discovering new mental diseases. I
couldn't believe how much that every DSM just keeps growing and growing, and the meds are there ready and waiting to treat them.
Here's something I'll say that'll piss off the mental health professionals all over the world who believe that medication is the answer. My position, after being in practice for close to 47 years and teaching at various universities, et cetera, is that if you're prescribing drugs to, quote, help the person for his mental illness, then you're admitting failure in your inability to communicate effectively with your patient. You prescribe drugs when you can't help them anymore. You don't understand what they're saying. You don't know how to talk to him. But then they resort to a physical explanation for why the person is the way he is. Frankly, I've had a client who exhibited such strong cognitive difficulties that I wanted him to see a psychiatrist and neurologist. I said, I think this fellow has got dementia of some sort, like from a stroke or from cancer or whatever. And his wife got very angry with me. She said, you don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, I looked it up. I studied it. Why don't you let the neurologist decide? And they said, you're right. You're right, Schaler. But that, it's just 2 + 2 = 4. If you keep repeating the same thing over and over again every 2 to 3 minutes, you start to suspect there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
All I did was refer it to him to a neurologist, psychiatrist. Psychiatrists keep wanting to be neurologists. They say everything is a brain disease, et cetera, et cetera. But the neurologists won't allow that to be included in their definitions of diseases because they know it's suspect. They know it's suspect. It's not scientifically valid. That's the bottom line.
Okay.
That's why we don't see schizophrenia and depression and all these other mental issues that are in the DSM listed in standard textbooks on pathology.
John says here, talking to Skin, and like I say, Skin, I know people who've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I know what it's like to be around them. My mum knows what it's like to be around someone who's diagnosed with addiction for 20 odd years. But John here says, my son has schizophrenia. It's real. Now, I think you've kind of missed the point a bit, John, because your son exhibits behaviors that a particular branch of medicine has labeled schizophrenia.
Right.
How has that helped your son or you? I think that's where it gets relevant. I mean, so these are, we've ticked off 7 of the 9.
Right.
Look, we're made up by people who work for pharmaceutical companies. I'm on your side, John. But when you say it's real, he behaves in a certain way. Well, so do you. So do I. So does Jeff. So does everyone here.
Right.
What is it? If it's real, what is it?
I used to say that to my students all the time. What is it? And I had other professors come in screaming, saying, "We know what it is." And I would say, "Would you explain it?" And they say, "Well, I can't remember right now."
And I've also, and I don't want to lose any friends here because we are all friends here. But I've seen people treated for schizophrenia. I've seen people treated for ADHD where I grew up, and the treatment wasn't for the person they were giving the drugs to; it was for the family, without a doubt. Because when that kid come back like that,
right,
like it's like Clockwork Orange. And the family like, oh, it's much better now. I'm like, oh yeah, I bet it is. He hasn't spoken in 4 days.
No, you're absolutely right, Chris. Absolutely right.
That might be preferable, of course, to him throwing axes at you. However, they're like the sort of anomalies out there cases. And I just think if we were a bit more honest about this treatment of, or not treatment, but your behavior is causing problems to other people. Let's see what we can do about that rather than just drug you up. And you're essentially putting someone into a suicide. You're into a coma now until you die. And I've seen that. And weirdly, it's the family that's paying for the treatment as well.
Right. No, that's very good point, Chris. Very good point.
Raymond wants to say, I love you all. Thank you, Raymond. Thanks. Likewise. I mean, this is tricky and difficult stuff to talk about. Sure. We can admit that. Thank you, Raymond.
Yes.
Vincent says there's 8 different types of schizophrenia recognized these days. I mean, well, if it carries on as it's going on, there'll be 100 in 30 years. I
Exactly.
mean, just keep adding. And that's when we become more normalized, and you're not allowed to step out of that very thin line. That's what 1984 is. That's what Brave New World is about.
Right.
Shut up, stay in line. You know, in 1984, you get 3 minutes to hate, or is it 2 minutes? And then that's it. No more hate, because that's mental.
Right. No, that's great. Great points. I agree with everything you've said.
That's because I've been reading your writing for the last 5 years.
Well, I'm curious. When the person said there are 8 different types of schizophrenia, the first thing I thought of was Democrat, conservative, libertarian, socialist, Presbyterian, atheist, Catholic. Are those the different types? I don't know. I think they're all crazy. Yeah, right.
But John, I think Alzheimer's is a brain disease. I don't think Alzheimer's is, well, I'll have to ask Jeffrey. Alzheimer's is a brain disease, isn't it? It's not a mental illness.
Sure. One of the difficulties is discovering the signs of Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, you can only conclusively do that after an autopsy. You have to examine the brain tissue. But there are certain groups of symptoms where the person has memory problems that seem unique to Alzheimer's. But the bottom line is we can't really diagnose Alzheimer's disease independent of an autopsy. I mean, my dad had, I thought he had Alzheimer's. It was basically a part of Parkinson's disease. And he didn't meet all the symptom qualifications or characteristics of memory loss in the way that's unique to Alzheimer's patients, but it definitely is a physical thing. So it's a very tragic illness. It's just terrible, absolutely terrible.
Oh, okay. Someone knows what Skin knows what depot. No, and likewise, Skin and Tonic. Skin says, I agree that psychs are complete cunts, but I still ain't got the answer on the subject. No, likewise. But what I will say is the route that psychiatry has taken mental illness down is withholding finding answers. It's putting a barrier in the way. You know, that's the issue I've got with it. Oh yeah, Duck Boy. Sorry, Jeff. I can see you've had your eyes closed for the last 15 minutes. So it's been a long stream.
I love this. I'm a little tired, so go ahead.
I won't keep you much longer because I could talk about this forever. Duck Boy Jida mentioned to me the other day, but you might have to culture-bound syndromes. But have you heard anything about that? He gave me a bit more info on it the other day, but I forgot. Have you heard about culture-bound?
I'm not familiar with that specific term, but just applying common sense. I mean, ideas about homosexuality are culture-bound, aren't they? You're sick if enough people in a particular culture or society thinks that you're sick. And if you aren't sick, then they say that homosexuality is normal.
You've absolutely nailed it. It says here on the abstract, culture-bound syndrome is a broad rubric that encompasses certain behavioral, affective, and cognitive manifestations seen in specific cultures. So what's considered madness in one culture is revered in another culture.
That's exactly right. I completely agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, good.
I mean, look, let's compare that with real disease, though. If you have a disease, a type of cancer in the UK, it's generally regarded as such in another country. You know, I mean, they may have different ideas, but basically cancer here is cancer there. If they apply the same, criteria. But if we're talking about psychiatry's, something that's behavior that's considered crazy here may not be considered that crazy in another country.
I think interestingly, in the 1980s, when global communication started improving, every country would have television programs that showed other countries' television programs and we'd laugh at them because look at these, they're crazy. Look what they think's entertaining.
Right.
And they were doing the same to us.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. I think that makes that point.
Sure.
Billy's asked a couple of questions. I think we've answered the top one. Alzheimer's is a brain disease, Billy.
Yeah. Yes.
It can be detected.
Right.
So that's a different thing. Thank you, LC350, who says blinder. Nice one. Billy says this. How would you treat someone with severe psychosis, severely delusional, someone who's truly dangerous to themselves and others? Seriously, what would you do? Do you have a solution?
Are you talking about somebody like Donald Trump?
There's loads of Trump fans here.
Go
the Biden route. You'll do better.
What? Say it again.
Go the Biden route. You'll do better.
Yeah, he's asleep at the wheel, but I think he doesn't do as much damage as what Trump is doing. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, obviously these are all political. These are all political issues, which is what most of psychiatric diagnosis is about. It's some kind of political issue. Right.
Yeah, but answer what Billy's question. So, what would you do if an individual come to you?
Okay. Well, now you just already differentiated something that I've seen done before. I don't work with people who are brought to me. So if the person is brought to me, I won't. Okay. I only work with people who want to work with me. And then the next step is, well, what would you like help with? You see, once you put it in that context, it's a completely different ballgame.
Yeah.
What would you like some help with? And sometimes they want help and sometimes they don't. So I try to help them become more aware of what they're doing and how they're behaving is based on certain values and how they may be living against themselves and all that stuff. If he says that, I had a client once he said he wanted to quit therapy because I didn't believe in Jesus. And I said, well, what do you mean? You're saying that Jesus is here right now? And he said, of course he is. And I got up and put a chair in front of the two of us. And I said, ask Jesus to have a seat, please. He didn't want to do that. He didn't. He said, well, he doesn't exist. And I said, well, but then how can I help you? I don't understand. That's your religious idea. I'm not sure what I can do, nor what anybody can do. If you want to really believe it, then smoke some pot or drop some LSD. If you really don't want to believe that, then take some Thorazine or Haldol.
Never have you told a patient to take acid. Surely, I'm not buying that.
Well, I think acid, LSD. I took plenty of it, probably too much, many years ago.
Me too.
I think it has a place. I guess one of the things I disagree with people about who are very big acid fans is that you don't have to keep taking it over and over again. What I learned from a couple of trips on LSD was that I could view myself in the world in profoundly different ways.
That is I've said that on this very channel. I call it critical distance.
Yes.
I can see things that were once familiar in a new way.
Right.
And after a couple of years of taking a lot of acid, that was just becoming repetitive and I didn't need to take it anymore. I can just do that. That might be a familiar object, but
right.
It isn't. This is culturally contrived, historically kind of motivated. And that's why I gave it. I stopped doing it in the end because, here we go, this again. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I'm tripping. Yeah,
right.
No, that's a great point.
I think I just question why when they say, well, we want to take it all the time. I said, well, you can do that if you want, but I don't quite understand why you want to keep repeating it,
Yeah, no, I did get bored. So that comment that Hans mentioned earlier, he tried not believing that he didn't have a mental illness, but it didn't work. So someone thought that so when Hans said earlier, let me read it out again because this is quite important, I think. Hans said, I tried the Schaler treatment after my first schizophrenia diagnosis. So Hans was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he decided he wasn't buying it. But later on, he started taking a monthly injection. Now, thank you, Vincent, for clearing that up. I mean, I am trying to juggle a lot of quite intense things here. What I would say, though, Hans, is what did you do instead? You know, you were diagnosed with schizophrenia and you went, okay, I'm not buying that. But what did you do to deal with your behaviors? Did you do anything? Or did you sit around and go, it hasn't changed, I'll go and take the medication? I'm not saying you did, but I'm just positing that. Andrew, I'll put that link in the chat again from that Dr. James Davis, because what you've just said there is the invention of the DSM. They fit the conditions. They created the conditions to fit around the drug. They actually done that. I'll put the link in the chat again. It's well worth a watch. It's 2 hours and very interesting. Jeff, I'll let you go. I just got a couple more donations. They might be questions. And then I finally will let you go.
You're holding me against my will.
Yeah.
No, you're not. This is involuntary treatment on the Chris Dangerfield show. No. It's fun.
No treatment, treatment, and still no consent. Mrs. Mean, it says, ignore me, danger. No crackers for you at Christmas. Question. Mind of the menopause.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad. Well, I think that menopause is pretty certainly related to a couple things. One, the decrease in estrogen in the body, which obviously has an effect on how people feel and act. I mean, I don't consider that to be a mental illness. That's a hormonal change that has profound effects in terms of how people experience life. The other thing is that your physical image of yourself changes. You know, as one client of mine once said to me, I'm going through menopause, Jeff. And I said, okay, can you tell me what it's like? And she said, everything goes down. Meaning everything sags and everything, just including her mood. But I think that there's some things that you can help yourself with, but I don't consider that a mental illness. So,
yeah, well, as you said, there's actual chemical changes and imbalances in the body. So there you go. Thank you, Mrs. Mina. I don't mean to be ignoring you. There's just a lot going on. I think we're done for questions. Let me just check. Yeah.
People can write to me and I'll send my answers to Chris. If you want to post them, we can do that. No big deal.
There you go. Jeff's email is in the chat. I did miss one from John Palmer. He sent a super chat where he said, amazing guest. Thanks, Dr. Jeff. I think it's Professor. Please be back soon. We'll get you back. To. Lovely.
Chris,
Jeff, congratulations.
Chris is my favorite interviewer. I think that we should take our show on the road and do this all over the world.
The Schaler Dangerfield treatment.
Well, yeah, I think we get along really well, and I think people would find it very entertaining. So,
it's always a good chat. Congratulations. You're bulletproof. I mean, when you told me you were diagnosed with cancer, you know, that's never nice to hear. And then next couple of months later, you said, yeah, it's kind of done. and you know, you look great, you sound great. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for adapting to my stupidity and getting it a day early.
I'm glad we could salvage it. And I love your audience. I love the questions and statements that they all make. And thank you all for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay. Chris, you're a great guy. Take care.
Look after yourself, and I'll talk to you via email. See you, mate.
All right. Bye-bye.
Jeff Schaler. Now, so look, I think it's important to say, I tried to make it clear. I know that Jeff is not saying that people don't exhibit very difficult behaviors, and no one's saying that. I've seen it in the chat, like people saying, try dealing with it 6 years, try dealing with it for 2 years. I know these people. I know people with these things. I've been around them. I had a friend who's dead. He is dead. But the point that is important, thank you, Skin and Tonic. That feels almost like a bit of a knowledge branch, because I don't want to upset you. I love you, man. You're an original OG. That's an OOG scrub. Thank you, mate. But the point is, if we tolerate a system of diagnosis of this thing called mental illness, and I think that point that Jeffrey made is key. Mental is abstract. That's mind. That's not brain. How can the mind be ill? The mind that's poetic. There isn't a mind. You can't get a doctor and say, can you cut this out of his mind? The mind isn't a thing. The mind is like the imagination. So how does the mind get ill? Now, that's not to say that people can't be a nightmare to be around because of their behavior. But because psychiatry has seen this grift a mile away, I mean, please watch that documentary. I've just put the link in the chat again. Just for the numbers. I'm not trying to brainwash you with what I think and what Jeff has taught me. But just for the numbers, and to find out how the DSM was made, who made it, how they made it, and why they made it. Personally, I see the way they treat addiction, the way they treat schizophrenia, the way they treat ADHD, the way they treat depression, clinical depression, as actually things that stop us from actually getting anywhere with people in those exhibiting those behaviors. We're going backwards with it. The DSM has said, right, they've got this, they exhibit these behaviors, so they've got this, we can drug them up, and look, they don't do it anymore. And okay, but you can also drug someone up who's a bit hyper, which they do. They give kids Ritalin, which is already come off the back of 30 years of psychiatry, giving kids drugs because they're a bit boisterous and in a feminized education system. That's fucking awful. I'm not an arsehole. I want people who are suffering to have better lives. I just tend to feel that this is all a blag, and it looks good temporarily, but we're not actually getting anywhere with it. And that's before we even look at the whole normalization of behavior. And you can pick the outliers. Oh, look at this bloke, he was a serial killer, paranoid schizophrenic. Oh, look at this geezer, look, he can't sit down for more than 5 minutes. He's up and down, up and down, up and down. We've got to sedate him. Well, next year, those lines come in a bit. And then the new outliers were the last decade's people on the inside. And then the next decade's outliers were on the inside. And after 50 years, that line starts getting... And that is what Brave New World and 1984 are essentially about. Just keep people through authoritarian and tyrannical means, and medicine and psychiatry is without doubt tyrannical. Keep them in line, shut them up, and get them to do what you want. And surely, as people who are politically engaged, whether we've suffered in our private lives, which many of us have, that doesn't mean we can't step back a bit from our emotional responses to a very difficult situation and see a bigger picture, which is making things worse. Because if you have lived with people with excessive behavioral problems, and I keep stressing behavioral because the mind isn't medical, it's an abstract idea, the mind. We keep looking at that, but if we don't admit what's actually going on, this will still be happening in 100 years. You know, people will still be living with these nightmares because they've stopped thinking about it. Now we know what this is. We know what that is. We just drug it up. That's what Clockwork Orange is about. Oh, this kid's got problems. Well, we just fill him full of drugs. That's what Anthony Burgess. That's what a Clockwork Orange is. It's something that's useless. You know, why do you need to wind up an orange? What, so that it ticks? Or it's nothing, is it? So yeah, there's so many avenues out of it. But nice one, Skin and Tonic. And I thought it was an interesting area to bring in as well. I hope I didn't upset you, because I don't like upsetting people when I'm trying to be honest. Ludwig, good challenging chat, Scrubs. Cheers to Dr. Jeff. Seems so much of the mind we may never understand. Think you're spot on about so much psychiatry being a racket. Ludwig, watch that I'll put it in the chat again. It'll blow your mind. I only watched it today. Liam sent it to me, and it absolutely blew my mind. I mean, I knew the DSM was a dodgy bit of writing, but you know, Big Pharma made it. They wrote the book to, I can't remember who said, someone absolutely nailed it, but they made a book so that they could what do you call it? They could give these behaviors names, and then they could sell them drugs. It's a tricky one, though, you know. Right, I also need a pit stop. I've done 2.5 hours. I think I had a couple more donations come through. Done Billy's. Got yours in, LC 350. Thank you, mate. Done Mrs. Minutes. Vincent says we can all be a bit mental. This is a fair point. Thank you, Ludwig. I think I've got them all. I think I've got all of those. Sorry, Hans, I missed your point. But we got there in the end. Vart. Zen Maverick, seriously, you should read The Minds of Billy Milligan. I'll tell you what, I'll type it in now so I don't forget it. I'll have a look at it. We've got a lot of reading on at the moment, which is a bit of a pest because I've also got a lot of writing on. The new Substack is out tonight, guaranteed. I guarantee it's out tonight. As soon as I get off here, I'm starting on that. Oh, I was going to lift some weights. I'll get the Substack done. Manny Moo says, I can't even get it into my head that some people don't have an internal dialogue. I don't understand. Hans, science should always be open for discussion, no reservations. Yeah, I mean, we've seen what's happened in academia because things aren't open to discussion. No reservations, but I honestly don't want to experiment with my life not to take my drug. But you are experimenting with your life by taking that drug. I mean, and out of the two options, that might be the better option, and that's your decision. I wouldn't tell you what to do, of course not. That's your decision. But I don't think one is necessarily not an experiment. But you know, I'm not in your head. I'm not in your life. And if you know, look, if taking a drug has improved the quality of your life, and you're aware of the side effects of those drugs, and you're willing to take those risks, then you've done a good thing. That's working for you. You know, I don't think that's. I'm fine. Baz, I have done because Thomas Saz was Jeff's mentor. Cheers, Otto. Right, people, what's a Substack? Well, but there is a new one coming out tonight, and it's quite a nice rites of passage. It's quite sensual, but it's a little bit sad. And all my stories like that, a little bit sad and sensual. with a bit of smack in there somewhere. Anyone got any? They treat people with narcolepsy with stimulants, strangely enough. I mean, I don't know anything anywhere. I don't know anything anywhere near enough about that to know how. Very thought-provoking stream. Thank you, Marsh. Aprashik and R2. Yeah, likewise, a lot for me to think about as well. Andrew, it might be monetized actually, but I'm looking about a year in the future, so I've stopped saying that. Billy reckons I missed one more donation. Well, there was one of them, but he'd already answered. He'd already answered it, I think. Hang on. Oh, he'd done that one. He done the one about Alzheimer's. We answered that. He said that Alzheimer's is a brain disease, isn't it? You said in the clip played before you came on, you said it can't. I'll have to have a look at that clip. I'm sorry I didn't read the full question out on the chat, but I thought we'd covered that. If the mind is not physical, how come lobotomies basically destroy it? You are really making me grift myself. No, lobotomies, Billy, you're not getting this, are you? When they give you a lobotomy, do they put those irradiated little bits of whatever? Do they put them into your brain or do they put them into your mind? And if they put them into your mind, can you tell me where they find it? Where's your mind? The mind is an abstract concept. It's poetics. The mind isn't a thing. You know, the mind doesn't have different areas or anything. The mind is another word for personality, for lack of a better word. Thank you, though, Martin. Nice to see everyone here. I mean, you know, it's an heavy-going conversation. I'll tell you what, I'll drag this out. I'll drag this old classic out. Seems relevant. Where are we going with that? Hang on. Right, people, thanks for coming along. If you've got anything you want to ask Mr. Vart, his name's not Mr. Vart, RP, you carry a lot of us to better understanding, Chris. Bless you, mate. Thank you, thank you, Raymond. I nearly called you RP again. Thank you, RP. I quite like RP, though, but I suppose it's your choice. Thank you, Raymond. Appreciated. Hello, Mr. Natras. Where am I going? Let's go for that one and have a little softer exit. All right, people. Business as usual tomorrow. I'll try and do a clips and memes, and we can have a nice light stream. It's too hard for me to find that one. Is it a single song or is it on an album? Let me have a look. But if you're not on my Substack, link in the description. The one that comes out tonight, or well, it'll be tonight for you. Yeah, is awesome. If it's a single song, Baz, I'll play it. But if it's halfway through an album, I'll play something else. I don't know this one. Oh, no, it's a single. Oh, we've had it before, haven't we? Right, here we go. I want to thank everyone who donated. I want to thank the boy Cray and the man Rags for looking after the place. I want to thank everyone who asked questions, because that's where it got really interesting, because when you involve your own experiences, you know, it raises the bar a bit. And I want to thank everyone for coming back to another Scrubs stream. It's an absolute privilege to come here, do these things. Sorry about the little fuck up at the beginning, but pulled it out of the bag in the end. This is Bally G with Heaven Can Wait. Oh, hang on. Oh my God, it's one of his accidental Beatles pastiches. Look after yourselves, people. I'll put your comments on the screen as we're playing out. Ta-ta! Look at his head. Vart. Nice one, Packer. Cheers, Chris. See you all later, Scrubs.
Every day we're waiting for a chance of settling down, to accommodating of the needy people around. It's a long, long way from the cradle to the grave. After all this work, what do you get? If you're watching pain with the patience of a saint, I can understand why you forget. Worried woman, in your wisdom, take a problem, let it go. It'll send you round the bend. Worried woman, in your wisdom, take it easy, take it slow. It'll work out in the end. Just with friends. Pardon my elation, it's the other side of my brain. This anticipation is enough to send you insane. It's a long, long way from the cradle to the grave. And when times are tough, we medicate. It'll get you down if you watch the clock go round. We can take our time, heaven can wait. Worry woman, in your wisdom, take a problem, let it go. It'll send you round the bend. Worry woman, in your wisdom, take it easy, take it slow. It'll work out in the end.
Me too, Steve. This isn't my muscle.
Heaven, heaven can wait. Heaven, heaven, heaven can wait. Heaven, heaven, heaven can wait. Heaven, heaven, heaven can wait.
Yeah, I mean, I make no secrets about how much I like Bally G's music, but I also make no secret about how much I don't like that sort of Bally G's music. I'll tell him that. I can't be doing with that Paul McCartney stuff. I'll never listen to that again in my life. You dirted me. Look after yourselves, people. Go on. I'll see you tomorrow.